Cool. So, I had a couple things I want to say first, just to embarrass you.
Oh gosh.
Um, uh, so I'm doing, I think, like 20 of these things. And this is the one I'm looking forward to the most. I just feel like you're an icon, really, in the investment community of my generation. And uh, I love your dad. Um, so the students should know that Will's dad was the chairman of the executive committee of the Providence Journal when I was a CFO, and it really um, was the reason we were able to do the things we were able to there. And then you helped me get started. Helped me to get started at McGonagall and all the rest of it. So thank you, and thanks for coming today, and thanks for everything you've done over the last 30 years. I really appreciate it. Um,
Great to be here, Tom. So thanks for having me. Yeah.
yeah. So I like to ask people, what's your first recollection of us being together? Because I have one, but I want to know what yours is.
I think my first recollection is I don't remember the exact circumstance, but you came by my old office. I was literally working out of a closet at that point in time uh, at 500 Boylston Street. So right behind Trinity Church on the 18th floor. And there was a conference room where I was allowed to occasionally meet people when I got out of my closet. And Tom came by, I think through mutual contacts. Probably, my dad was part of that. Maybe it probably was through my dad. And you were still at the Providence Journal, beginning to sort through like the complex mix of transactions that unlocked all that value there. And we just immediately hit it off, and it began a dialogue that continued into and through early days at McGonagall and SBICs and all sorts of other topics. But that was the initial breadcrumb as I remember it. But that's like 30, almost 35 years ago now. So that could be wrong. Could not be,
Yeah,
probably not perfectly precise. Yeah.
yeah. So my recollection of that was that you were telling me in that closet about this company, Road Rescue, which sounded like a bunch of
That probably is true. That probably is
a
true.
bunch of uh, you know trucks to go out and help people on the road. And I remember telling you that it was the stupidest fucking idea I'd ever heard of in my life. I think in those words exactly.
Yeah. My guess is that's verbatim. Yeah.
And I guess for the students, like that company that I was saying was so stupid, is now called Assurian. And have you sold any shares in that? Have you sold the original shares, I guess is the question.
No, we still, I mean, we've sold some shares along the way for sure. We still own some of the original shares. Yeah.
And so what is the compound MOIC, meaning the multiple of invested capital on that investment, which I thought was so stupid?
I mean, on the total original investment, it's about 500x. On the
Oh,
um, on the original shares, just the shares themselves, it's well north of that because it's a yeah, yeah. That was a pretty good one. Yeah.
and so my last kind of introductory comment was, so guys, so what happened was that Will did eventually get a real office at 11 Newbury Street on the fifth floor, and then he said, "Oh, he's like Tom, like the fourth floor is actually available." And that was when I was raising a venture capital fund, and so I moved into the fourth floor, and so we kind of shared this office space for a while. And so my question is, was the fifth floor where you were, or was the fourth floor where I was more fashionable?
I mean, no question, fifth floor all the way. I think.
Fifth floor. Come on, man. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into the meat of it. So, um, you've had this amazing career in all that. Kind of what are you most proud of?
Wow, that's a good question. Let's see. So, um, let's see. I think I'm proudest of the relationships I've formed across, I mean, it's about 35 years now, um, investing with an amazingly talented group of partners, CEO partners, so people who have run our companies. But I'd say just generally, like the whole idea of partnership, broadly has been. That's probably what I'm most proud of. Is sort of I did think this whole idea of compounding, which you guys will talk about, I'm sure recurringly across this class, that'll come up, and I think it just takes different forms. One of the most powerful forms is in relationships, right? And the same principles that apply in the narrow financial definition or way of thinking about compounding apply in the relationship piece of it, which is like churn is very costly, would be one of the ideas, right? And to continue to benefit from those relationships, you need to continue to invest in them. So this relates to, I would say, relationships very broadly, but specifically it relates to one sort of sub genre of that, which would be friendships, right? And so continue to invest in those, which of course you guys here as, I don't know, 20-year-olds, your lens on that is different, but believe me, it gets harder to do that as you go along in the years and you have competing demands on your time, family, work, girlfriends, whatever. So continue to invest in them, which requires conscious effort, is key to continuing to benefit from the compounding, I think. So I think there's some broader notions around compounding. But anyway, that would be my that would be my answer, Tom.
Funny, like that's actually verbatim for several other people who and how they answer that question too. So it's a common theme. So if there's one mistake that you'd like to take back in your professional career, what would that be?
Wow, that's a good question too. Um, that's a good question. I guess if I had a mistake that I would take back, it would be it would actually go back to when I was your age, right? So um, I I had this amazing opportunity as an undergraduate. Um, I went to Harvard College. I actually loved my major. I was an English major, which actually is weirdly, we can go into the parallels between that and the work I ended up doing as an investor. I think they're significant, but I didn't, I squandered that opportunity. I did not optimize it. I was actually um, pretty wired for academic work. And I just did enough work to get decent grades and no more. If you're an English major, that is a very low level of work that allows you to do that, right? So despite loving it, and I kind of missed that opportunity. I think that was I don't know, like or I guess, yeah, significant regret I have. I mean, I think if I had gone now to school in the current era, I would have taken a year off or certainly taken a semester, studied abroad. I think I would have benefited very significantly from either or both of those activities. I got lucky in things I did later, sort of helped me recover some of those experiences in terms of where I went to business school and that kind of thing, which we get into. But yeah, I think early on I under optimized for that, and I regret that still. Not sure it would have led me down different paths, although it well might have. I don't know.
So at this point, like looking back, what do you kind of think are your strengths and weaknesses and how those played out in terms of, where you succeeded and failed along the way?
Let's see, strengths and weaknesses. Let's start with the weaknesses. I would say that I like my default setting is pretty high level. So I'm not well oriented towards, or not, detail is not like my natural, you know, area of focus, my bailiwick. Um, and uh, and it applies also to, in the narrow construct of business. I'm much more comfortable and better suited with the investing work, the role of an investor versus the role of a manager or CEO. And I was involved with running a private equity firm for a long time, and I just wasn't a great like day-to-day manager, or someone who would, relished giving reviews or kind of the mechanics of doing that job well. I was not particularly well suited for. So I think there's probably I think there's sort of different types of intelligence. People are wired differently. I think some people are wired, their intelligence is such that they're really good around complicated situations. So they're sort of simplifiers and complexifiers, is what I would say. I think people divide into either one of those two camps. And I am for sure, and probably to a fault, a simplifier, and not a complexifier. And so I think there's sort of some strengths that come from that, but also some weaknesses. Very important to have the right partners if you're wired that way. Actually, regardless of how you're wired, it's important to have partners who are complements to those strengths, and vice versa. Um, so that's how I guess that's how I'd think about that one.
So when you look back over your career, like what was the absolute most fun you've had?
That's a good question. Um, I mean, I loved the super early days launching Housatonic, out of that closet. Like we started that firm over 4+ years. We made 8 investments. I was literally the only guy in the office, but I love the companies and a bunch of those relationships. I'm still of the. We made 8 investments over those 4 years. We're still involved as an investor. We're still invested with 3 of the 8 companies. Almost 30. One of the companies turns 30 next month. How about that? It's a long time to be at. And that was just a super energizing time. I had a weird thing. Like if you ask me the day, kind of at least my professional day that was most fulfilling. I mean, there'd maybe a tie for two things. One, after those 4 years, we kind of moved to the office Tom described. We raised our first fund, and we had a first annual meeting, and that was just like the most fun thing. Like I knew all those investors really well, and we'd done those 8 investments, and it just like something about the rhythm of that day was pretty magical. But the other one would be when this is probably 10 years ago, 11 years ago. I wrote a book, later in my career, which I had a lot of fun with. It took me a very long time to do it. It's a very short book. But the book came out, and a guy I know well up in Maine, we've got a place up in Maine near Acadia National Park, organized like a reading, not a reading, more like he and I did a talk, like a fireside chat talk about the book at the local library up there. And like he cast a pretty wide net, and an incredible number of people showed up. And he's just a great guy who I knew well and got along really well with. And we had like an hour together at this really cool old library up there with, like, I don't know, 200 like really close friends and interesting. I said that day, like if you could bottle that day, it was pretty great. So professionally, sort of fun, like just things clicked. And anyway, so that's a riff on your question, Tom.
All right, so two follow-ups there. So one, just so students know, Houstonic is the private equity firm that Will founded. So what vintage fund are they on now, and how
I
much
mean, it sort of
capital?
depends on how you count it. I mean, they're on fund 7. If you count it if you that's a if you counted it on every entity, it's more like fund 10,
How much
fund
capital do
9,
they have under
9 or
management?
10, a couple billion,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah,
So it worked out well.
but that was okay. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and so, and on the book, so the book he's talking about is The Outsiders, which is, by many measures, one of the best books on business ever written, including Warren Buffett's opinion on that. How did that idea come to you?
Yeah, so It's kind of an interesting. So, Housatonic, the private equity firm Tom just described that I was involved with, we used to do a conference for our CEOs, the people who ran our companies, every 2 years. And at those conferences, we'd always have a headliner speaker. So we'd have someone, we had Michael Lewis come a couple times. We had a guy named Jim Collins, who's a very famous business author, wrote a book called Good to Great. He was actually a student I had in business school. He came when he was, the first year we did that conference, he sort of kicked it off and presented his research before the book came out, which is cool. Anyway, we'd have a headliner speaker, and then we'd have sort of a few talks that were more practically oriented. And I raised my hand, 20 years ago now, and said, hey, I'll do one of those talks. I then had to figure out what I was going to talk about. And we had a really talented student who was working for us between his years at Harvard Business School that summer. And I asked him if he wanted to work with me to do the research for the talk I would give at the CEO conference. And he was a doubles player. He played college tennis. And he said that he would love to, but he couldn't. He just committed to another independent study, but his doubles partner was looking. So he connected me with his doubles partner, who was this amazingly talented guy named Aleem Chowdhury. And Aleem was, about to enter his second year at HBS. He played college tennis at Stanford, and he was a summa in physics, super talented guy. And he agreed to do the project. And the deal was he got a full year credit in his second year to do the research with me. And we just did this super deep. We picked a company called Teledyne and a CEO named Henry Singleton. And we basically spent a year and went crazy deep on the company in the analysis around how it had performed over time and this and that. And then in the second, when we did all this analytical work, in the second semester, we met with everyone alive who'd had anything to do with that company. It was just really fun. It indicated to me that I was wired in a very odd way, but it was really fun. And I kind of was writing it up to give the talk. And that guy, Aleem, came to me and he said, hey, if you want to do another one of these things next year, I've got an excellent guy in the class behind me. And I said, okay, sure. So I basically did, and that was the same deal. He did, full year independent study for credit. So I did one a year with these really talented HBS students. And I needed them because I needed to do the analytical work. I had to be able to get the actual data. And the Harvard Business School has an amazing library called the Baker Library. And I didn't go to Harvard, so I couldn't get there myself. So I needed the students. Plus, they were fun to work with. So it just took me a long time. It's a short book and took me 1 year per chapter, but it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And I didn't think it was a book until probably the third or fourth year in. And I was like, well, maybe this could. So I was an accidental author, is what I would say.
And so just to connect the dots, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but at least one, maybe probably both of the guys who were running Notre Dame's equity portfolio and then spun out to create Cedar Grove were your student assistants on the book Outsiders, right?
That's right. Just one of them, Paul Buster.
Okay.
The other one was a tennis player, actually knew Aleem from tennis, but just Paul, he did the Ralston Purina chapter, and he was great. And we're still very close friends. I actually just did a podcast with those guys. I think it's coming out this week, actually.
Yeah, so guys, I had already mentioned, I love Cedar Grove. So these are the guys who have love on the front of their on the front of their website, and permanent capital. Only invest with people 10 years that you love and trust and that you're prepared to be partners with forever, which is kind of my motto in life these days. Um, but this one very quick. It's really a one word answer. Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School?
Stanford.
If my nephew Mark Solomorsky is listening, who got into both and made the right choice, you understand why.
I'd say it's not even close. I'm deeply biased, but it's not even close.
All right, let's get into so when were you first exposed to the search fund model, and what is it that you love about it?
Yeah, listen, I'm old, right? So I went to business school, and the search fund model, it was super, it was just getting started, right? It was like a revolutionary concept. People didn't really know about it. But I went to Stanford, which was basically sort of the seed corn area for, it was really sort of it was like the equivalent if you're a golfer of St. Andrews, right? Or it's kind of the cradle of the concept. Um, and I went to school there and got connected to the faculty member, sort of key influencer, Johnny Appleseed guy, a professor named Irv Grossbeck, who's sort of the founder of that. He, by the way, he ended up buying the Celtics later in life, or his son ran it, and they just sold it. He's an amazing guy. Anyway, he and I got to know him quite well, and that was just as search was getting started. Literally, I'm in the process right now of doing some work on the original 7 search companies.
Oh wow.
I'm calling them the original 7, which is a pun on the original 6, which is hockey thing. If any of you guys are into hockey, but anyway, so the original 7, and I got connected. My first investment was number 6 of the 7. And I first learned about it like maybe at 4 or 5. So it's that early on. And then, so I got to know it through that initial early connection. And it was an initial source of deals for Housatonic because I was starting Housatonic. I had a proprietary interaction or proprietary access to that network. So we made a bunch of early investments there. And then the returns were really good. So returns to search, and there's a lot of data on this now. Stanford does a study every 18 to 24 months. But, the data is kind of remarkable. I mean, the N is now quite high, and the returns measured either by IRR or MOIC, concepts I know Tom is working with you guys on, but it doesn't really matter. In either case, they're really good, very high relative to returns for private equity more generally. They're quite a bit better than private equity more generally. So I was fortunate enough to get exposed to all that early on and then to act on it. If you go back to those original 8 investments I was making out of the closet, 2 of them were deal 6 and deal 7 in the history of search funds. It's kind of framed
Wow.
out. So,
Wow. Yeah, I don't ask me why, but at a god awful hour this morning, I was digging around in the most recent 2024 Stanford study, and so the data is that 4.5 times your money, and if you exclude the top 5, like Asurion, it's 3.2 times. These are net numbers and net of all fees and the entrepreneur's cut. And I think the IRR is somewhere north of 30. So big numbers, even with a very large number of searchers at this point.
and just quickly
So
on
how,
that, Tom, the only point I'd make on that is those numbers are accurate. And if you look at everyone talks about private equity, and I'm sure you guys are hearing about that. If you looked at the industry of private equity, the industry class, asset class, the returns there would be for IRR would be about 15%, maybe slightly higher than that, maybe 17 or 18%, something like that. And the multiple of capital would be between 2 and 2.5 times. So meaningfully lower. Big delta, big difference. So anyway, sorry,
yeah,
couldn't
well,
resist. Yeah.
I can talk about this all day, but like, so just before we get to the next topic, but what do you think drives that delta?
Yeah. I think it's fundamentally targeting the least efficient part of the market for private equity. So smaller transactions. And there's a structural reason that I think that area will always retain inefficiency, because it's very hard to invest in companies of that size. So the size companies that search funds target, they generally have $1 to $3 million of EBITDA, of profitability, of cash flow. And that's just small. Typical private equity would, their minimum threshold for company size measured by EBITDA would be more like 5, 3 to 5, to as much as 10 would be the lower end of the band. And the reason for that is it's really hard to grow a private equity firm if you make investments of that size, because in order to grow it, you have to invest in a lot of companies. And that's just really hard to manage. So you can't really scale a firm that way. So there's some inherent inefficiencies that I think are likely to the keep that market an attractive place. I continue to invest very actively personally in search and have for 30 years now, long time.
So how did your thinking evolve from search to more of a long-term hold strategy, and maybe describe what long-term hold is?
Yeah. So I think if you look at the data on search, which I've done a lot of work on, search returns are out. They're really good, like Tom just said. The issue is that because of the way the incentives work for the searchers, for the CEOs, they tend to sell the companies earlier, so that they can crystallize their management equity, their management ownership. And the targets that they're focused on are often tied to IRR. And the hurdles, the highest rate of IRR in those typical schedules is very high, 35%. And so searchers have a pretty strong motivation to sell to sort of guarantee they get the full management performance shares. But search shows typical ownership in search, typical holding period in search would be 5 years, maybe as much as 7 years. And I did this detailed study, Tom knows about this, probably 4 years ago now ish, and looked at all of the search fund outcomes that I was aware of, which is a pretty sizable percentage of the total data set. And I looked at the returns to the next owners of the search companies. And the returns to the next owners were incredibly consistent. I think there were 45 of them, high 40s. Not a single one lost money. It's kind of remarkable, right? So, and then the average returns, both IRR and MOIC, the mean, the median, and the mode were right on top of each other. Sort of very attractive. So mid-30s IRR, 3.5-ish X net MOIC from the price they had paid the search investors and the searcher, right? So basically a very compelling argument to hold these things longer. And so in the investing I've been doing over the last dozen years or so entirely on my own, I left Housatonic around that time, has been focused on structuring investments in such a way that we can own them, in fact, create incentives for the CEOs to want to own them for much longer periods of time. The period I talk about is 20 years because I figure I've got about 20 years left if I'm lucky as an investor because I'm an old codger, quite a bit older than Tom, by the way. And so,
I think 1 year, by the way, but that's okay.
1 year. It's a big year, by the way. It's a big year. So that's sort of it. I'm trying to own things for longer periods of time. I'm just investing personal capital, which is very simplifying. None of the nonsense about LPs, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one way to simplify that is I've heard you say other places that you know the compounding rate is certainly important, but the N is more important. In other words, if you compound 20% over a really long period of time, it's far superior than compounding 35% over a relatively short period of time.
Yes. Well said. Crisply stated. I concur. Yeah.
So let me I actually another something else that just actually came up today. So there is this formula that I created to try and solve the problem that you articulated, which is that people search entrepreneurs tend to want to sell too soon, right?
Yeah.
And so I was trying to create this kind of bridge where the incentive was like 35% IRR is harder and harder to maintain as numbers get bigger over longer periods of time. And so there's a hard incentive under the traditional formula to sell as soon as you kind of hit it. I mean, so that we saw people selling after 2 and 3 years. And so I created a formula that basically had reduce the IRR to 20% and try to put it on a multiple of invested capital in the out years after 5.
Yep.
There's been some complexity on that in terms of that formula is hard to apply if there's multiple, if the cash flows in and out become more frequent. And so like the hold period is not as clear. So one thing I've been thinking about as a further kind of modification of that, and just kind of on the fly, I wanted to ask you about was what if we went in search, still traditional search, but what if we went to just a purely MOIC hurdle, meaning between three and the data, like I said, the reason I was in there was because 4.5 times is kind of the average. So when I talk to people, they say, a 5 times deal is good, really good. A 3 times deal is like okay. And so what
Yeah.
if you just used like you modeled out 3 to 5 times as the 0 to 100% performance metrics, but then you added on top like a double trigger and said the IRR no matter what has to be better than 20%, just so you couldn't go on forever. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Do you
Yep.
think that model would work?
Yeah, I like that model. I mean, I would say the model that has evolved around these longer hold vehicles is a variant on that. And I would
Okay.
describe, so the basic way, the way I would summarize that is I would say, which is very similar, Tom. So let me lay it out, see what you think. But that model is we've removed IRR and just tied it to net MOIC and tied it to a very simple system of doubles. So two, 2x, 4x, et cetera, with the upper end typically pretty ambitious, right? Because the whole goal of that is to incent people to own things for longer periods of time. We're trying to incent duration,
Right.
longer duration. So literally in some of these, the top threshold is 64x.
Right.
Um, and and it's net MOIC, I should say. Very importantly, it's net MOIC. But we're allowing the searchers or creating an incentive for the searchers to own as much as 40% of the company over time
Right. Right.
if they get to 64x, right? Which
Yeah.
sounds crazy, but 64x is basically 20% for 20 years.
Right.
Maybe it's 21%, right? So the goal is and that has worked really well. That has generally worked really well, and it's also served as a filter on the front end for the searchers, right? If you're a searcher, you don't want to own something for a longer period of time, which is very reasonable, by the way. You may not want to do long. It isn't the right model for you. You'd
Right.
rather have it organized in some other way, and I'm open to talking about that. But
Yeah,
anyways,
I guess my solution is I understand your model is like a 20-year model. I'm trying to solve for people who still want to do something that's closer
yep,
to traditional search,
yep.
where
And
like they don't want to be locked in for 20 years.
I think something that's call it in the 5 to 10 band. I think that's where that would apply, right?
Yeah,
Something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I think something like that model, Tom, works well. The key, I think, is the simplicity, right? So
yeah.
just having as few triggers as possible. Just keep it just huge Occam's razor, right? Huge power in keeping it crazy simple, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, I like that idea. Yep.
All right, change topics a little bit. So I know that you've had some ups and downs medically over the last few years. Has that like changed your perspective on what's important in life, how you think about business, how it fits into, family and friends and the rest? How are you thinking about things these days?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I had a bout with cancer. I had something called a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I had it in my brain. It's basically not the optimal place to get something like that, by the way, for what it's worth. Uh, and what I had was fast growing, right? Also not perfect. But it was very dynamic in the sense that it was also highly treatable if caught early. So I just was crazy lucky in that I got it, they diagnosed it early. They were able to get at it surgically. And then it was a very clear course of treatment, chemotherapy in my case. So I came out of all that. It took me about a year, basically, I'd say. Slightly less than that, but let's call it a year. Uh, and so I had a long period of like Winston Churchill had this expression, never waste a long convalescence. And I had a long convalescence, right? So I had time to sort of step back. I call it like a forced hiatus, forced sabbatical. Um, so I had time to think about all this, and I did, and I emerged from that, with I guess the following principles, and they're not perfect. And I'm in the process of implementing them. I'm kind of a year after that, so it's still pretty new. Oh, by the way, all that coincided with me turning 60, right? So there's a life milestone in the middle of all that, and basically, um, the the sort of key priorities that came out of that are um, number one, I'm just unbelievably fortunate. I'm so grateful, right, for my friends like Tom, my family, the amazing medical team I had. I'm just overwhelmed with like huge um, gratitude and appreciation and so forth. So very, very, very humbling in that sense. And I'm trying to. I have been trying to concentrate my activities. So if you go back to like portfolio construction, I had prior to all this, I had a very diversified portfolio. I was doing a lot of different things, and I really liked it. Everything I was doing, I was very. I had retired from Houstonic. I had sort of leapt into a variety of activities, and honestly, I enjoyed the variety. I enjoyed the different activities I was involved with, and I enjoyed the breadth. I sort of concluded after this hiatus that I wanted um, to go to more of a concentrated portfolio, and so I've been trying to do that. I'd give myself like a B, maybe a B minus so far. So I'm trimming some things. It takes a little longer to do that than you would like to think, but I have been doing net trimming, and one of the things, and then trying to allocate more time to the things that are really energizing. And friends and family are a big part of that. Maybe the most important part of that. One of the learnings, going back to the relationship thing we were talking about. So I'm trying to allocate more time and energy to those activities. And within the investing business stuff I'm doing, basically I'm trying to do a smaller number of more concentrated things that I can own for longer periods of time with people I'm most excited to work with. Um, and again, I'm on a journey to achieving that. I'm not all the way there. I haven't been perfect about implementation. Problem is, I like it all, right? So that's I mean, it's a fortunate spot, but it means I'm probably a little slower to cut things and make those decisions. Although I'm in the process of doing that, and I am making some progress. But anyway, that's a rambling answer to your question, Tom. But there it is.
Well, one follow up I know that's close to your heart is that we talked at lunch the other day about what you're doing with your foundation. So I think that'd be interesting to tell the students about how, because you take a pretty novel approach to thinking through that.
Yeah. So Jeannie and I, my wife and I, created a foundation right before I got sick, and we set it up in a very specific way to optimize the long-term compounding of the capital there. So the goal is to, which probably doesn't surprise you guys, given some of the other things we've been talking about, but we sort of set it up in this very unusual way to allow that to happen and give us some flexibility. And we're still sort of, and we funded it initially with some capital. It'll end up being half of the total family capital. It's not there at the moment, but it's, initial amount got funded, and sort of figuring out exactly what we want to focus the foundation's energies on. And there's one specific project that was the one that we had in mind when we kind of set off to do this, and we're now well underway to getting that launched. And basic idea there is to have the foundation be in a position to provide resources to super talented people very early in their careers. And the specific way we're thinking about that is, so these are people in nonprofit fields. We're starting in academics because it's sort of, there's a easy kind of chronology and structure in place there, but the idea is for it to be broader than that over time. And we're basically looking for people who are like, if they were in the world of academia, they would be post PhD, pre tenure. That's how I would think about that. So basically 27 to early to mid 30s, 33, 34. So and that's the period where really talented people have the hardest time attracting resources. So the idea here is to concentrate our resources on that audience, both in terms of capital, but also in terms of broader support, mentoring and financial advice and media advice, just helping develop a toolkit for people in that age group to help them be successful in their life's work post that period. So that's kind of our focus. And foundation is called the Cromwell Harbor Foundation, and there's a prize. That's the way we're going to, at least initially, sort of express that. It's called the Chrysalis Prize. And I was fortunate enough. I was in. Tom knows. Tom and I both share ties to the state of Maine, and I have a house just out there, placed near Acadia National Park, pretty far up in Maine. It's a small, really great small college up there called College of the Atlantic that I got involved with and eventually became the board chair of. And in doing that, I got very close to the president, who he basically was 1 year in when I became board chair. So he and I worked very closely together. He was the second youngest college president in the country when he got that job. So he and I worked very closely together, and he ended up retiring after 13 years from that job, just as we were founding the foundation. So he became our first director, which gave us sort of a dose of much needed energy as we were getting started on the foundation thing. So we're now off and running under his name is Darren Collins, under Darren's leadership. So that's
Cool.
that's a
I'm
little.
really looking forward to seeing how that all works out.
Yeah, yeah.
So this kind of last question for you, and then I'll turn it over to the students. So what advice would you give these guys who are, again, just finished their freshman and sophomore year, very serious athletes, smart guys? What if they are interested in business? What wisdom can you pass along?
Yeah, let's see. I would say, I guess my number one piece of advice would be to feed your curiosity, right? Like I mean, the great thing about business and investing is there's an unbelievable opportunity to get vicarious experience through reading stuff and listening to stuff. And that's always been there, but it's never been better than it is right now. Podcasting and even Twitter feeds and I mean, books are good, by the way, too. There's some really, really good books, which there are a bunch of stuff that you guys could read there that I think is great. But there's all kinds. I would just, omnivorously consume whatever you can get your hands on if these things interest you. So that would be number one. And then number two, I'd say just, be thoughtful about your first job and don't feel like you have to go down the most trodden path. You don't have to join a consulting firm or an investment bank. There are other things you can do. And the more you guys do your own reading and thinking, the more you'll be able to not the number one risk as you guys head down your career path, I think, is you go into one of these great fields, you get a really good job, and you guys are going to be successful regardless of what you do. But it's kind of like the idea of imprinting in ducklings, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but like basically when a duckling is born, they imprint on the first thing they see. And like 99.99% of the time it's their mom, which is the right answer. Every now and then, like the farmer's son or daughter walks in front and they imprint off of that and they follow it around. It's a little bit like that in your early careers. You imprint on your early role models disproportionately. So the risk is you imprint off the wrong role model, would be my thing. And so what can be an antidote to that is reading and podcast. Like before you start your job, have a sense for what you might be interested in or who some interesting people are. So you're not just imprint. You're going to probably end up with somebody great who you'll work with, but investment banking and consulting are narrow fields and within business. And so I would just urge you to not go there and get the most learning you can from those training programs, that kind of thing. But don't let it limit how you think about your career more broadly as an investor or a business person or maybe eventually a CEO.
Awesome. Yeah. Preaching to the choir on that.
Yeah.
All right. So hands have been flying up here. We're going to get to as many as we can, but I want to be respectful of Will's time.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, Hawken. Yeah. So TransDigm is this amazing company that is in the aerospace parts business. They have an amazing, amazing 30-year record run by a guy named Nick Howley, who's wonderful. And they're just super disciplined, as Hawkins said. They actually didn't get rid of those businesses, but they did sell them off. So they just remained very focused on staying in the exact sort of the best parts of the market they thought that had the most long-term potential. And that rigor, that discipline has been extremely productive for the management team and for the shareholders there over a long period of time. Yeah, and I think there's some principles there that apply more broadly to to investing into business. I think again, that idea of sort of concentration versus diversification, whether it's in a single business or in an investment portfolio, being really thoughtful about where you can concentrate your efforts in such a way that you can get the best results, whether those are investment returns or operating results for a company. It's like a critical crux question. And the best CEOs and investors tend to be concentrated. Like not in every case, but more often than not, they tend to be concentrated. The best public market investors in the stock market, they all own 10 to 20 companies and no more. There are almost no examples, very, very, very few examples of people who've owned 50 or 100 companies and had a really good long-term record. It's kind of interesting. So I think that there's a broader principle there that probably does apply. Yeah. That's a good question, Anthony. Let's see. I mean, I think for me, it's a very personal answer to that question, right? And so for me, it goes back to this idea of like omnivorous curiosity. Like I just find this stuff really interesting. Like I'm intellectually interested in understanding these things and trying to figure them out. And that hasn't changed even at 61 after some health stuff. I still get up in the morning and that stuff intellectually engages me. It's a very personal thing, and so when you get to be my age, the way I would describe it is, the whole point of investing success or business success is to build life flexibility, right? Which I would define as the ability to do what you want with the people you want to do it with. And financially, that comes from the balance sheet, not the income statement. It comes from net worth, not current compensation, right? And so, anyway, those are, yeah. It's a really good question, but I think it derives from what what you find energizing. I mean, I like to go look for lost trails in Acadia National Park. I have stuff outside of business I'm interested in, but you can find me like way off the radar screen looking for old cairns in Acadia National Park, right? So it's just what turns you on. It's a very personal thing, I think. Yeah. So
all right. So 2 quick questions and then we're out.
Yeah.
Your favorite? I embarrassed all these guys. What's your favorite movie?
Boy, that's a great question. I didn't think about that. Let's see. I mean, I'm pretty deep on movies.
This first to come to mind.
All right. Well, I just recommended it to some people, so I'm not sure it qualifies, but I love the Fantastic Mr. Fox of Wes Anderson's genre, and it goes both ways. You could kids, you could when you guys have children, you watch them. So that's not my. I got it. That's probably that's not the right. Anyway, I'll go with that for now. Fantastic Mr.
All right.
Fox.
All right. Good one. And then last but not least, if you want to leave these guys with one word, what would the word be?
Compounding.
Compounding.
And I, again, do not mean it in the financial sense when I say that, although it's part of it. It's in the nature of the word. But yeah, that's my word, compounding.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making an hour for us. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Great to meet you all.
All right.
Good luck in your lives. Take care.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.